go to the
You don't care about the slides?
huh? Google Slides.
They always have extra ideas.
Yeah, because it's a scam. My friend had like 40 left.
Is it recording?
$400.
Wait, is it?
Because they expect you to eat breakfast.
Yes, it is. Okay.
Unlimited? No. You have like different tiers.
It's 2 minutes.
It's like breakfast, it's like a 4-hour period on lunch, and then like dinner time. And you can't barely.
So I'm gonna take this first and go to this.
I'm assuming a lot of people out here do some midterms.
Yeah. Also, the last one was kind of boring. It was just a lecture. Yeah, start now. All right, we will now begin. So, thank you all for coming to the second workshop that we've had. Apologies for the structure of the last one. We were kind of really pressured on time to like get stuff set up, so we weren't able to get enough supplementary material out there. However, we are releasing our notes every single week, around a few days to the day before each workshop. We'll have the notes up. They're on GitHub in README format. They're more comprehensive than probably this lecture, but also really good as a supplementary material. So this one is going to be Intermediate CSS, the box model, and positioning. You might think to yourself, what is a box model? Like, how is CSS ever rendered? How do I view something? And that's kind of what we'll be getting into today. However, before that, we're going to be reviewing HTML and CSS from the last lecture in a much more streamlined and neat way. So the first thing is, what is HTML? HTML is hypertext markup language. Emphasis on markup. Think of it as like you writing something down. It's something that you write and it's translated, kind of ish. Recall that it is kind of like the foundation of a web page. HTML is the skeletal structure of the page. CSS is what you see. JavaScript is the actual thinking and processing behind it. It is composed of different tags which generalize the location of the layout of all the content on the web page. So really, it's like I said before, it's the skeletal structure of the entire thing. So what is a tag now? So it is simply this. It is two pairs of two brackets. So you have an opening and a closing. It has an element name. So for example, this one is div, which stands for division. And to close the tag, it will have a slash at the very beginning of it. So it's an opening and a closing. And this is what you call an element. All right, next, we'll get into self-closing tags. So self-closing elements only have one tag. Think of it as it begins and ends itself all at once. They don't force text to a new line, which is what you might think it does. So it's still one element as it would be with two tags. It looks like very similar, but this time it's just one bracket pair. It contains the element name, and it has the slash at the very end this time, and that symbolizes the ending of the tag. So this is a self-closing element. Next, just a comparison. You can kind of see the differences in them. You have two in a normal element. You have one in a self-closing element. It's beautiful. Just notate the difference that, what is it? The closing line, so the forward slash in a element is in the second tag. Think of it as a begin and an end. And then in a self-closing element, it begins and ends itself. So that's kind of differentiates it. Hopefully that kind of gives you a visual way to understand how elements work. Next thing is the basic structure of an HTML document. So this is kind of like boilerplate, and it always begins like this. Every single web page will have something like this. So it has a doc type HTML, and this is required, and it tells the web browser that this is an HTML file that it's reading. Next, you have the head, which is the root of the document. This is, once again, boilerplate, which means that it's pretty standardized. It's just something that you memorize. It's not something that you really intuitively do. It's literally just always there. Next is the head, which is kind of like where the metadata is stored. So if you want to display on your web page the title of it, like when you hover over a Chrome tab, that's kind of metadata. It's not something that you see on the page itself. It's just kind of there. So if you want to have a image icon, it's also that. Next is the body. And the body is just kind of like the content of it. So it's like a human. You have the head and you have the body. Head is kind of like your peripherals. It's meta, but it's not really what you see, while the body is kind of the entire crux of it. So next is, how can you see HTML? So if you can all go to your browser, go to a random web page. I'll wait for all of y'all to do that real quickly. Hopefully opening up Chrome isn't too much of an arduous task. If you right click and you click inspect element, something that you guys should be very familiar with sometime back in elementary school, whenever you're trying to hack into the computer system. If you right click on it, inspect element, you'll see this thing on the right side. It may look different. It's probably in light mode, so it looks white. Yeah, it looks like this. It's kind of what you can see as HTML. That's HTML. Can you click on the page? Just exit out of it. Yeah, click. Yeah. So yeah, this is it. Kind of ignore this bottom part. That bottom part, if you're on Chrome, is usually a Chrome update. If you exit out of that, that's going to be the actual CSS. Okay, next. Now we're going to get to the kind of fun stuff of everything, getting to the actual information. So this is a massive table. If you ignore all of like the extra stuff down here, you can see that heading elements kind of just, or H with a number from 1 to 6 just stands for heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The greater the number, the smaller it will be. And it controls both the size and like how, like, it's just kind of how big it is. It's literally heading tags. If you have a title, it's going to be H1, subtitles H2, subheadings for that is going to be H3, et cetera, et cetera. Next, you have paragraph elements, and those are just kind of the content itself of like what you will write. So if you write an entire article, you're going to use a heading tag for the title of the article. You use a paragraph tag for the actual content of it. Next is going to be span. This is similar to a div, which we'll cover in a second. And it's not really something that will have an immediate effect that you can see. It's more of just there as a wrapper, which is like, imagine wrapping something up in like wrapping a gift up. It doesn't really change what's inside of it. It's just a way to kind of stylize it or like put something over it without changing the contents. So as you can see in this example right here, I colored this using a span tag with CSS styling. We'll get into that in a bit. Next is lists. So you have ordered lists, unordered lists, and lists. Kind of think of it as ordered lists and unordered lists are like bullet points are unordered. Numbered is ordered. Kind of goes with like the name, it's related. And then all of the elements or items inside of it use the list tag. So if you want to display something like over here, use an ordered list for numbers. You could have a mix of it and have an unordered list inside of it. And then in each of those, you'll be writing out LI for list, and this will be where you put all of the items in it. And those are to create lists. Next is division or div. This is probably one of the most important ones to learn. You'll be using that a lot. It's kind of a way to write or code HTML without having a semantic name to it. So you don't need the semantic name of it's a heading, it's a something. It's more of just, it's just an unsemantic way to write code. It's also used a lot in wrapping code. So yeah, it doesn't serve an immediate thing like span. You don't immediately see it. It's just like a wrapper. Next is the anchor tag. This is used for links. And then the image tag is used for images. And you can kind of see it here. Any questions so far? All right. Next is, what does an HTML file look like? So as we kind of touched last week, it is like a tree. You have the very root element being HTML, then you have your head. Inside of the head, or sorry, inside of it. Another child element of HTML would be the body. So it contains both head and body. But this body could have children elements such as div that could have heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, heading 5, heading 6. It could also contain a paragraph element. This paragraph element could have a span element inside of it. Outside of that, we can have a span element by itself. Outside of that, going back up, going to the parent of it, that body could have a child of div. This could have an ordered list in it with 5 list items. It could also have an unordered list with 5 list items. And then going back to a child of the body, you can have an anchor, and then you can have an image. It's kind of like a tree, as you can see. You have parents, you have children. Elements can descend another, and they're kind of, in a way, just linked to it, but as a child or as a parent, depending on which way you look at it. Next is element properties. Oh, actually, sorry, I lied. So this is what this looks like visualized with content in it. And as I said before, think of the roots as the document HTML tag. That is the root of everything. Everything is a child of the HTML tag. Think of any immediate children, so any of these circle dots, so body and head, as children nodes of the parent node being HTML. And continuing with this pattern, everything, every bullet point that continues the indentation, that's a child of the parent. So it's like a tree, which you guys have touched algorithms or discrete math too, and CS theory, that's a good crux of it. So next, for real this time, is, or are element properties. So element properties have a kind of stylized way that's in addition to the normal tag system. So you continue to have the tag name, which for example could be div. Then you can have infinitely as many properties as you want. There are some semantically declared ones in like the definition of the language itself, which we'll get to in a bit. But there's also ones that you can make yourself. If you use React, it will have some ends library that you can use. All of these properties can have property values, and in some cases, you can have multiple. So yeah, once again, 3 properties can have tag name, property names, property values, and it can have multiple properties, which we'll cover in about 2 minutes. Next. Okay, some element property examples. Here is, once again, the kind of structure of it. You can have image. Image has a source property, and it has a property value of the website. It could be an anchor element, where the actual value is a hyperlink reference, which is just saying that this is the link to it. And that can also have the property value of the website itself. This one, as you can note, image is self-closing. Anchors can be self-closing. Actually, can they? I don't think so. No, anchors cannot be self-closing. I lied. It wraps around this text, and that way you can actually hyperlink this text to this URL. And lastly, there's link. This is seen more when you deal with style sheets, like linking the CSS in the HTML file. And yeah, it has 2 properties, type and rel. Type is saying what it is. So when we deal more with like APIs and backend stuff, like whenever we're getting these payloads in XML format, which is kind of like HTML, it's going to have type like JSON/application. So for this one, it's just style sheet. It's just an idiom that you'll have to remember. When you want to link a style sheet, just use type style sheet, and rel is the relative location to it. So in this case, it's just styles of CSS, which is in the same folder as our HTML document. Next is common element property names. So one of the most important things that we could touch are classes. It is one of 2 things that are very important to kind of link HTML and CSS together. And it's in conjunction kind of with IDs. So for classes, it's structured as a class is the name of the property. And then anything that is a property value is a property value. It's the class name. You can actually have multiple of these. So if you want, you have header space header 2 space header 3 space header 4, and then you can access all of those properties in CSS. So you can have multiple classes. Yeah, and that's just kind of a way to semantically designate that, designate a way for us to kind of link to and kind of modify this. And that's with classes. Classes are used mostly with CSS. Next are IDs. So IDs, very, very similar to classes. You can have both of them, by the way, but IDs can only take in one. 1 It can only take in 1 property value. Classes can take 1 or more. And IDs are used mostly with JavaScript, and it's a way for JavaScript to interact with, or semantically interact with the DOM, or the document object model, which is our HTML document. In a way, you can also kind of attach to both or modify both using classes and headers in both both CSS and JavaScript. It's more semantically defined and probably better and more readable to make it to where if you want to access it via CSS, you use class. If you want to access it via JavaScript, you use ID. It's just an easier way for people to understand and read it. So yeah, that's that. Next. Okay, now for the CSS portion of the review for the last workshop, very simply have it put, you have a selector, you have a property name with a value pair, and then you can have multiple. You can have multiple properties being, if you want font, color, background color, etc. These can all have different values, and those are kind of things that you'll have to find in a manual or documentation. And yeah, that's kind of how you write CSS. We'll cover that more in this one. So now, now we can actually use CSS to interact with these HTML elements that we had and kind of stylize them. So there are 3 ways that we can do this. The first one is an element selector. So if you give the element name that we are using here as our selector, you can select that. So you'll select, in this case, you'll select any element that's a div. So if you have it anywhere in the document, it's going to have this styling for whatever you define it as. Next, we have classes. Classes, kind of the same way, but it's denoted with a dot. Dot means classes. If you recall how this is kind of like a tree where you can have children elements of others. So you can have a paragraph inside of a div, for example. If both of those have classes and you want to access anything that is a child of the parent with specific class names, you can actually append just another dot and the name of it. So in this case, anything with the original class big and any child element with the class name title will have this styling right here. Next, we have ID. ID is the way that you would interact normally with JavaScript, but you can also do it in CSS, and that's denoted by a hashtag. Think of hashtag as number or like ID, hashtag ID, classes or dots. And yeah, that's kind of how you select anything with an ID. Next are some common CSS properties. This is just a massive list. You can just spam it. So some examples is anything with header 1, you can see it has a font size of 50 pixels. Header 1 could have font size 30 pixels. We can have a paragraph. So any paragraph element that we have will have the styling. It's going to have Comic Sans in a thin, solid black style. Div, anything that's a div is going to have a solid blue background. Really big is going to have a massive font size, and that's just kind of how it works seen in production. Next. All right, now to link everything kind of back together, you may think, how do we actually connect CSS to the HTML? How does the HTML know what it's styled as? And with that, we have an element called link. The href, or what it's linking to, is just the file path of the CSS file. And then it has to have a type saying what it actually is. So in this case, it's text or CSS. And then we have a relative location, which is just what it is. So style sheet. And that pretty much is it for the review. Does anybody have any questions or tiny bit confused? All right, hopefully that worked out because we're going to be getting into a more in-depth look at CSS, getting to actually styling stuff. So let's switch over to our docs and our code space. Okay, so once again, we're going to be using codesandbox.io. Right here. Yeah. So we're going to be using codesandbox.io to kind of go through this. After last lecture, I realized that I went too much around this as a presentation. It will be more of an interactive one this time. So kind of I'll just give you a little bit of a lecture first. So let's go to the notes that we have posted. Okay, so can you zoom in a little bit? All right, so the way that stuff is stylized in a web page kind of works as a box model. Everything works like a box, boxes in boxes in boxes. You can use these boxes in different ways, and that's just how stylizing HTML works, or stylizing a web app works. So they're kind of think of it as like Russian nesting dolls in a way. Your HTML is a nesting dolls. The way it looks is a CSS. You can have different sized ones, and in this case, for the boxes, we kind of have some ways to differentiate how we space stuff. So there are 4 main ways of spacing it. Can you zoom in a little bit more on the image? So there are 4 different ways we can do it. There's a border, there's a margin, there's padding, and then there's the actual content. That's kind of how this box model works. So the content could be, for example, your paragraphs. So all of the text will be displayed in content. You can have padding, which is like inside the box. Then you can have a margin, which is outside the box. And then you can have a border around it. So if you want to have an outline on the box, that's kind of how you do it. But those are the 4 components to the box model. So before we can actually implement it, let's just go a little bit more over the theory around it, or the way it works. So actually, let's implement it instead. Yeah.
Oh, we can actually show it.
Huh?
We could show the box model right now.
Yeah, let's go to Code Sandbox. Okay, so if all of you guys can go to your Code Sandbox, let's create a division. So just make a div. For now, we're good at any properties. If you guys on the side can go around and help people out, that'd be fantastic. So yeah, first create a division. This is, as we said before, it's kind of like a wrapper, but now we can stylize this wrapper to have certain unique properties. Are you guys all in Code Sandbox? Okay, perfect. So now with this, let's say we give it a class, so we can actually use CSS now. So we can give it a class property of, let's call it box. Very, very beautiful name. And that's it. That's all we do for the HTML. You guys all there? Any troubles? All right. Yeah. All we're doing is creating an opening and closing div tag, and we're naming, or not naming, we're giving it a property of box, which we'll put in the beginning div tag. So now if we can move over to CSS, should be in source, src, yeah. Styles of CSS. If you guys open Code Sandbox, it should automatically link it, so you don't have to worry about linking it at all. Let's now attach this. Please remove all of that for now. Okay, let's actually try to edit this element. So let's select the class using dot. Remember, dot is class, hashtag is IDs, and then we can do dot box. Now the way that you define CSS tags is, or CSS properties and stylings is you have a closing, opening and closing bracket, and you can put stuff in there. And then with the property value pair, let's say we want to give it a width. Let's give it a width of 300 pixels. Now, and then we also have a semicolon at the end of each line. So you can't see it now because there's no way to differentiate an invisible box that has a size of 300. So before we get there, let's add a height too, so we can actually give it some dimension. Let's name the height, let's give it the value of 300 pixels, so we get a square box. Is everyone there? Let's have a 300 pixel box. Okay, now we can't see it right now because there's no color to it. It's kind of colorless. Let's give it a background color. So the property for this is background dash color. And let's give it a blue color. Try reloading it. There you go. So now, do all of you guys have a blue box on your screen? Anyone not there yet? Yeah. So CSS with HTML. CSS. Okay, go back. So we just give it 3 different property value pairs. We give a width, a height, and a background color with the respective 300 pixel, 300 pixel, and then blue. So those are just, as we said earlier, you're kind of defining what you're selecting, and you're kind of saying, we want to edit this attribute or this property of it, and we want to have this value. So it's not that. Do you guys all have blue boxes now on your screen? No, let me help you out real quickly. Can I see your HTML? What is your JavaScript? You want to go to index.html. Yeah. Yes, that. So if you can, inside of that, yeah, no, enter. Yeah. If you can add a div now, development, and then close it. And then you also write the ending now, so /div. Yep, and then close it. And then in the opening div tag, give it a class name. So class space class. Class is equal to box equals. Yep, and now just blue box. You guys all have blue boxes? Mm-hmm. You have a blue box?
Can you show me the HTML?
Can you go back to HTML?
Make sure you have, well, this header is not needed.
So just anywhere in your body tag, you can put a div. So I guess I didn't explain this very well, but you can have multiple elements with the same parent. So you can have multiple children. A parent could have multiple children. And it's kind of stacked on top of each other of like who's oldest to youngest. The youngest is the one that gets displayed, right? It's the newest one that gets displayed. So just anywhere, we deleted some of the code before because we didn't really need it. But just anywhere, anywhere that's a child of body, just create a div and name it, and give it the property of class with a value of box. You guys all have blue boxes now? Okay. Hopefully you guys all have that. And to kind of show a property of how divs are like wrappers, let's give it some text inside of the div. So let's give it, why not, I'm a box. Oh, sticky keys. So we can give it inside a property of I'm a box. And as you can see inside of it now, you should have the very hard to read, but still there, I'm a box text inside of your box. Everyone there? All right, okay. So now that we kind of worked with the content itself in this box property, you might also recall that kind of the box has a property, has padding inside of it. And that's how you kind of not center, but you kind of just like proportionalize the stuff inside of this box. So we can use padding. So if we go back to styles.css, we can actually work in this box and give it, actually, do you want to do another box inside of it?
Sure, we can make a separate class.
Okay, let's go back to the HTML. Can you go to a new line? You know, like inside of div. Yeah, and then make it look pretty. Yep. Okay, inside of your div, which should have a class of box, let's make another box inside of it. So do the exact same thing you did to create this blue box. So you can copy and paste, but put it inside of the box now. This time, instead of naming it with a class of box, let's give it what? Let's do orange dash box. And do you want to give it text inside of it? Let's say, let's just put something random in there. Use an orange box. Okay. So now they're kind of stacked on each other. We'll change it in a bit. Can you, real quickly, just for us, change the color from like blue to light blue? Yeah. So it's more legible.
Or that
So
too.
it's still a blue box. You can go back.
All right.
Okay. Do you guys all have a box instead of a box? It won't be any visually different. You'll just have like 2 lines of text. Does everybody have that? A box in a box. But you can't see the second box? Okay, let's go to the next part. So let's go to the CSS and stylize this orange box that we have inside of it. So we can just go to the styles of CSS, have a new selector for dot orange dash box. And once again, that's how you stylize it. We're kind of taking the class as a name and just modifying that based on the selector. And let's give it some properties now so we can see it. Let's give it a background color of orange. Now it doesn't look like a box, does it? Let's give it a width and height of 200 this time. So we have width 200 pixels. We're gonna have a height 200 pixels. Does anybody not see a box inside of the box? We all good? Does everybody have two boxes? Okay. Now that we have this orange box, let's kind of center it. Or not center it, but let's move it around inside of this blue box. So as I said earlier, there are, what is it? Inside of this box model, if you can go back to our notes, you can go back up to the graphic. Yeah, yep. Inside of this box model, you can see that this is the content. This is the text we have inside of the orange and blue box. In the orange box's case, the content is the orange box. The actual thing is, the pair of it is the blue box, right? But there's padding. So we can kind of move around and add padding to the blue box to move around the orange box. So let's go back to it. Let's go back to our normal box and let's give it a new property. Let's give it padding left. So if you give it a property padding dash left, you can give it a number. Let's give it, what, 50 pixels? So now we kind of moved everything in the box. We kind of just added like an entire line on this side. I just said like that's our padding. Nothing can touch that. It's kind of giving it space. So nothing can now be in that space on the left side. We can also give it a right padding. So padding dash right. And then some of you guys on the side, if you guys could go around and check if everyone's caught up. Let's give padding right 50 pixels too. So now this might be unexpected. It didn't actually move the thing in the left around. It more or less gave it a bigger box. It made it bigger. And that's because we actually can't, everything's centered on the left side right now. So we can't really move that around because it's anchored. So we can actually, it will actually expand the size to give it the 50 pixels. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just as we can do on the left and right, we can also give it a top and down. Or sorry, top and bottom.
Yeah.
Let's give it 50 pixels again. Yeah. So we can give it padding on every side, top right, bottom left. And there's an easy way to kind of move this all together. So if we can actually just get rid of the right, top, and bottom.
Easy.
Just get rid of like, yeah. So we can actually just, instead of having padding left or padding a direction, we can just name it padding. So if we do padding, and then we just give it 50px, it's actually the exact same thing. It ends up doing it on every side. So if you use padding instead of padding dash a direction, it'll apply it to every side. You can also do left, right, and top, bottom if you add another one. So if you do space 50px on the padding, if you do space like 100px, you can notice that the 50px, the first kind of value you have is top and bottom. The second value you have is left and right. So those are just kind of like definitions that you would look up in some kind of documentation. So Mozilla's documentation for CSS. It's just stuff that you'll have to memorize or get to learn. And that's kind of how it is. So now we've kind of worked with the second property of a box model. We worked with content. We worked with padding. Now, wait, is everyone caught up? Everyone okay? No questions? Any questions? Okay. Now, before we even touch margin, let's just kind of add a border to the boxes. They're kind of boring right now. Blends in-ish, the white and the aqua. Let's give it a border. So in the box itself, if we add border, we can actually give it some value. So the first value that you would have in this property is the size of it. So let's give it a border size of 3 pixels. Let's give it another value saying that it is a solid line. So we use solid as the value. And then we can add another value for the color of the line. So in this case, it's black. Let's make it red. Now you can kind of see that fourth property of a box model being the border itself. And that's black right now. Is it good? Okay. So that's the fourth property. And all that leaves left for us is margin. So what you'll most likely ever be editing inside CSS is going to be padding and margin. That's kind of like the most important part. Border you'll rarely use, and content is just kind of implicit because everything works like a tree. Everything's a child, everything's a parent. So yeah, let's work with margin. So now we can kind of see that we moved the orange box inside of the blue box with margin with the blue box. Sorry, padding the blue box. We give the blue box padding. We can achieve the exact same effect if we remove padding in the blue box. Also, if you guys want to fast comment out in your code sandbox, if you hit Command or Control / it comments out the entire line. Or if you're selecting multiple things, it will comment that entire section out. Very, very useful. So let's remove the padding from the blue box. So the box, let's remove that and let's go to orange box and let's mess around with margins now. So we can achieve the exact same effect we had before, but using a margin value. And just like how padding works, where if you give it one value, it applies it to every side. Let's give it 50px for margin. And you should kind of see the exact same thing that we have with padding, except this time, because we're giving it a margin, it cannot actually violate those rules. It cannot expand the box because we're kind of giving a restrictive limit. Wait, this is margin, right? Yeah. We're kind of giving it this restrictive limit. So with padding inside of the blue box, it can expand because we can expand that outside box. We're not restricting it. But with this orange box, we cannot violate the blue box's rules. The blue box will have that fixed site and it will not allow the orange box to give it a margin outside enough to actually push it. So we even give it 100 pixels. Let's make margin to 100. So it can't actually violate the blue box. Instead, it will violate itself and kind of just disappear off the face. So it's going to get cropped out essentially because it cannot change, the child cannot change the size of a parent in a block display. We'll get to in a tiny bit. But this is in a block style, and we cannot violate it. How did you violate it?
Oh man, you're speaking lies.
Don't think about it. Don't think about it. There might be a few things wrong with that. Don't think about it. You'll trial and error. It can get us anywhere. All right. Is everyone there? Question? Oh, gotcha. So, do you guys kind of understand the difference between padding and margin? Padding is the inside, margin is the outside of an element. So for the orange box, if we add padding inside, it will move around the text in this scenario. Also, if you inspect element on the bottom right, you can kind of see, if you scroll down, just a way to view the different parts of a box model. So in the orange, if you were to add padding, it would move the text inside of it. If you were to add margin, it will move itself around the blue box. If you added, padding inside of the blue box, it would move around the orange one. If you added margin, it would actually move the blue box around the web page, inside of the web page. Border, just add the border property to it. Content is anything inside of it. So those are the 4 properties of the box model. So yeah. Any questions? Are we all good? Can you guys go around and check real quick? Okay, so can we go back to the notes? So as you can see, imagine the border as like the outline of the box itself, the model that we're using. Margin is this outside portion, padding is the inside of it. So think of, I don't know how, what's a good way to visualize it.
I mean, you just start messing around in the
Yeah,
sandbox.
it's
itself.
just literally
So-
padding is inside, margin is outside. So think of it as if you have like a computer case, you can have padding inside of it, and that kind of moves the stuff around inside of it. It gives it that not buffer, but like that spacing. And that's the inside. The padding to a box is just like the inside part of it. While the margin is just like, if you can think of it as editing something in Google Docs or Word, that margin is just kind of the outside portion. It's outside of the text letters. It's moving that around. Or if you have paragraphs, it's moving the paragraphs around. So that's kind of the difference between padding and margin. Yes.
So for this example, the margin is the area between the orange box and that border blue box, basically? Or is
so-
that padded?
The margin of the orange box and the padding of the blue box are very similar. In this case, right now we have margin in the blue box, so it has that outside part. And then where's the padding? Oh, and then yeah, we also have padding, and then we have padding inside of it. So the padding right there, the 50 pixels, is the inside of it. That margin is moving it away from the edge of the web page right now.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Does everyone kind of understand the difference? They're both very, very, very useful tools in your toolbox for getting stuff to work.
So, can you not let me detect the pattern in the box itself, or does it only create this? Like, for example, the margin, we can see that there is some black border. But for padding, we don't see anything.
Yeah, border is like a style. It's part of the box model, but it's more of a style. It doesn't add space. It's kind of a blank space. So margin and padding are blank. The border is just the border itself. The content is any children element inside of it. Any children of it.
Oops.
So yeah, think of it border as just the box itself, an Amazon box. The stuff inside of it is the content. The border is like the actual brown part of the box. And then like the cushions that it arrives in for shipping material. That's the padding. And then I guess margin is just the space you leave it in. Like when they're stacking it in the cart to deliver, it's kind of the space they give it. That's the margin. So padding is the inside, margin is the outside. They can kind of have a similar effect if you use padding on the inner and margin on the inner, padding on the outer. It kind of has a similar effect. It can achieve the same thing. The more you use it, the more you'll kind of see the pros and cons of it. So do you guys all have the box model on your thing? Do you guys kind of see two boxes? Okay. If you guys can take a good 2 minutes to kind of mess around with it inside of your thing, like add different values, see how it kind of goes out, goes in, and just mess around with it, because it's probably the best way to learn CSS. It's through trial and error, knowing what works and what doesn't work.
It really is.
Like I can't express it enough. The hardest part about web dev is just bashing your head against your computer for a few hours.
Look at this pattern. Kind of curious with this extra space over here. Oh, is it because orange box is a square? What if I removed these constraints here? So, say it wasn't with constraint. That looks about right.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, the constraint.
because it's padding on top of height. You add the padding to the height. Sorry, width.
Ooh, but the height,
Right.
height still kills it. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of math.
Funny how I can just make them. It's also interesting how margin, you can still violate things within. This is interesting. This is very interesting. I didn't expect to be able to violate it like that.
Okay, we're ready to implement this right here. Box sizing. We'll do that next.
Boxing.
So if you can get the code space back to something that's normal, looks okay.
Hey, I'm just messing around.
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
So we can show the next part of it.
Okay.
Actually, let's just remove the orange box.
You sure?
Yeah.
Alright.
Or let's do that in a bit. So we don't confuse them. But like, reset the properties to be normal.
This is normal. What are you talking about? Yeah, no margin here. Oh, wait, I should probably keep margin though. So like this, it puts a 10 pixel margin on every side. 22 pixels. Let me see if I can center it.
Okay, let's go to the next part then. So let's remove all of the code that we have currently. So let's get rid of box, get rid of orange box, just delete not delete entire, remove all the contents of CSS. Good, like great for us. Remove that. And just like delete.
Just delete everything?
Yeah, delete everything. And then go to index. Go to index and remove your box. We're going to start with a new example here. So
Oh no, the box.
we're going to kind of show you another property that is very, very useful, which is called box sizing property. But before we show this, I'll kind of give a brief explanation of it. Technically, what we just described is how margin, border, padding, and content play together when the property box sizing of content box, so whenever we're using content box as the box sizing model, is set, which is normally the default value. So the default value of box sizing, which is using the box model, right, is content box. So, however, you'll normally also see people use a box sizing of border box. So instead of what we have here being content box, where the box is around the content itself, it's more around the border, so the box itself. It's kind of similar, kind of different. It gives like a few unique tools to use. But yeah, so what this does kind of in a descriptive way is that instead of making width and height control the content area, so the width of what we had of the box and height of the box control what's inside of it, it makes those properties itself control the combinations of border, padding, and content instead. This is often very convenient because you can dynamically size this bordered content with width and height without having to account for the padding or border sizes. That might all sound confusing. Might have just gone over your head, so we'll show it in an example. So in our HTML file, let's create two different elements. So if you guys remember, let's create two divs, one on top of each other, so not inside. Just two on top. Yep, two of them. Okay, you guys love two divs? Okay, let's give the first div a class name of text-card.spaced. So we'll have it on here. Text.card-spaced. And then let's give the second one the class name of that too. So the same thing. Text-card-spaced. Let's also give it the additional class property of box-sizing-border box. Border dash box. So kind of going back into the review, what we're talking about, you can have multiple classes and you can kind of modify that with HTML. You can't do the same thing with IDs. So let's just get some content for this. Just copy this part. So we're gonna give just put some text inside of the boxes so we can kind of visualize the way content's working versus this new box model where we're kind of going based on the box itself. So you guys all have two divs. You have to copy the text inside. We'll just show it up on here. We're making our own text. But you should have two properties. So you guys can go around. You guys really shouldn't see anything with two divs. Perfect. Okay. Two divs. You don't have to copy the text inside. The text you put inside the box, just don't worry about that. We're writing our own text right now.
Wait, can you switch to the CSS for a bit?
Yeah.
There's no CSS.
There's no CSS.
Oh, never mind.
It's just plain text.
Oh, we're starting.
All right. So I'll wait for you guys to get caught up on creating the two different divs right now. So just remember, div is like a wrapper. It's like a box. You can put stuff in it, decorate it, but if there's no decoration or nothing, then it's literally invisible.
We don't have to write the.
Yeah. Ignore this text. We'll just put it on here so you can read it while we work on it. But you can put anything inside of the boxes, inside of these divs. So are you guys all at the div part? Perfect. Okay. So next we're gonna go to our CSS file. And if you haven't already, remove everything inside of it. We don't need the contents right now. Let's start selecting these and modifying it. So let's have a selector for text card space. Let's have one for box sizing border box. Okay. Let me know when you guys have all of that. You guys all have that? The styling? Or like these selectors? Okay, perfect. Let's start giving it some content. So if you guys remember, you guys created 2 div elements. Both of them have one similar property, being text card spaced. But the second one has an additional one that's called box sizing border box. So let's add in text card space. Let's add some properties to it. So let's give it a width and a height of 200 pixels. So width 200 pixels, height 200 pixels. The way it's kind of formatted is property name colon, and then the value, and then units in this case, and then end with semicolon. So now that we have the text card space with a width and height of 200 pixels, let's give it some padding. So we're going to give it padding all around just by typing padding colon 10 pixels. This will apply to every direction because we're not specifying a direction, we're just saying everywhere. Let's also give it a border this time. Let's give it border 1 pixel, solid black. And now you should see both boxes have a border now, so we can kind of see it. Let's give anything with text card spaced as a class name. Let's give it a margin of 50 pixels. So it should now move outside of the, around in this web page. So it kind of moves around. You guys see that on your thing? Just as a reminder, padding is the inside, margin is the outside. So whenever we had a margin and moved it away from the parent box of it, which is actually the entire page, that's the body tag we have. So it's moving inside of that. And then text is now no longer located directly on the border. It's 10 pixels off, right? With our padding. So we added some padding inside. That way it doesn't touch the border. You guys all have that? You guys go run and check. All right, so you can kind of now see 2 boxes. Now let's get to the actual box sizing part of content box. Let's give the next style that we have, box sizing border box. Let's give it the property of box sizing, box dash sizing, and then give it a value of border dash box. So I don't know if you guys caught it whenever you guys ended up typing that, but it a little bit changed in the second box because that's the one that we had it as. Let's just switch back and forth. So like comment this property out back and forth, like just have it flash. Okay, and then do it. Again. And again. So do you guys notice a tiny bit of difference whenever you add border box as a property and what happens down here? If you notice when you have you don't have that property added, it should be it should now follow the properties you have of the other style. So it's taking in height and width. So whenever you have the normal style of content box, which is the other property for box sizing, it's going to end up paying attention to what the width and height is. However, if you use box content border box, if you uncomment it, it now cares more about the border. It's not caring about the properties, it's more about the border. I don't know if you guys kind of see the difference. I feel like if I explain it, I'm not going to explain it very well. But just know that if you like the default that box sizing will be for the box model is content box. We can give it border box and it worries more about the border. You have a better way to explain it? I feel like I'm not explaining it well. This is something that you might use a lot. but actually, in reality, you probably won't use this too much because we'll cover this in the next workshop. But the most common way to kind of arrange elements is with the flex property. Yes.
So, like, when I try to add the margin, the box, like, the box is disappeared.
Well, we're doing 500 pixels. Going on the screen. Do you want to get the pixels? Or you already see them.
Yep.
Oh, you HTML. Totally welcome. Yeah. So don't forget that your web page probably right there. If it's 700 pixels wide or 500 wide, so you need 500, it's off the screen. But yeah, we'll get more into like units in the next one too. That's when it kind of gets more important to understand what units to use and when to use it. But yeah, if you notice, as you wrote in the text, this card right here on the very top is actually 200 pixels plus 10 plus 1. The 200 comes from the width and height we gave it. The 10 came from the padding, and the 1 is the border of the box itself, the border property we gave it. So the total width is 211. However, whenever we used whenever we used the box sizing border box, it did not care about padding at all. It managed everything. So if you notice, it still kind of has a padding, but it managed it for you, and it's 200. So we created a 200 wide box using one property, and it has the padding that we had in the other one, but we didn't need to add the height and the width and the padding. We didn't need that. So whenever we used boxing size border box, it did all of that for us. Kind of make sense? Okay, what was your question? Perfect. Does anybody else need help? Ooh. Oh, why did it go down?
Yep.
CSS? Oh no, what's happening? Believe like that. I don't know what's happening. What the heck? Okay. Any questions with this? Yes. Oh, gotcha. Sorry, this is kind of boring. This is very memorization based. There's not really too much intuition. It's just based on the semantics of the way they named the properties that you have to memorize. So, actually, do you guys still need the HTML? Okay, so if we go back to it, the CSS, there's actually an easy way to do this. So we don't need any of this code at all, actually. Let's just remove width, height, padding, and margin. Let's just leave the border so we can see everything. Actually, no, remove everything. We can achieve this exact same effect in a much easier way. So if we remove everything, just entire CSS, clear it. If we clear CSS, let's attach to a selector known as the wildcard selector. It's the asterisk. This essentially will modify every single element. Every single one, it will modify all of that if you use asterisk. It's a wildcard, it means everything. Let's give it border, give it a border of, border 1 pixel, solid black. So we're going to give it back the border so we can see where the boxes are. And let's give it a box sizing of border box. Oh shoot, I forgot we removed the width or the height. But yeah, add it. I just realized the title's gonna mess it up. That was kind of voice just to me. Okay, yeah, go 2px. 2px. Sure, just something. No. These font is probably like 18.
I can remove the title.
Okay. Now, toggle on border box off and on.
This is too much height.
What does it do? Well, as you can see, that applies to everything. That was just kind of a way to teach the wildcard selector intermittently. But anywho, that's box sizing. Some of the last two concepts we'll cover, one of them is going to be display. This is where we're going to kind of like get into the stuff that you use more often than using box sizing. You'll probably never use box sizing again after this. If you do your sinning, this is kind of legacy in a sense because we have something called Flexbox, and that's going to be in the next workshop. But before that, there are two more important concepts, and those have to do with display. You okay? Okay, let's go back to HTML. If you guys can remove what you had before, let's change this up a tiny bit. Yeah. So remove everything inside a body, and we're going to add 4 elements. Let's have 4 elements. So do 4 divs. If you guys could do that. You guys can utilize copy and pasting for this to improve the efficiency. Are there any images that we could use inside of the sandbox?
Not that I know of.
Wait,
No, there's no images.
there's a solution to this. Let's use lorem pixum. Okay, so we're gonna mess with images now. So
Okay.
we'll cover that in it. I'll do that in 10 seconds. So do you guys have the 4 divs set up on top of each other? Okay, let's give all of these a class so we can utilize it. Let's give the first 2 large-img-container, so large image container. Put large wrong.
Oops.
And give that to the first 2 divs we have. In the last 2, do it similarly, but instead of large, do small. So we'll have 2 large image containers and 2 small ones. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be kind of getting into different ways to display content. So we worked with the box model, right? All of that works in a display style of a block. So it's like a box, but it's a block. There is another style or way we can display it, and that's with inline. And we'll cover that in a tiny second. It's a concept that's very, very closely and like very similarly related to the box model, but yeah. And this is where we'll also touch grid and flexbox next time, but yeah. So now that we have all of that, let's because we didn't touch images earlier, let's add some images. So let's create in the first large image container, let's create an image. So if you guys remember, image is a self-closing element. So you don't need to have 2 tags, it's just one, but you have a slash at the end. Let's get, it requires a property to actually show what it is. So in this case, let's do src, which is the property name, source, is equal to, and then 2 pairs of quotes. And we'll use what is it? We'll use an image that's online already. So if you guys can type in, I guess I'll there actually first. Are you guys at the, you guys should see an error on your screen if you haven't given it a path yet. You guys all have the error? Okay, so type in https://pic/sum.photos/id/ let's give it 200/200/200. All right. So do you guys all see an image now on your screen? We just gave a website to a random image, or a link to a random image. Do you guys all see it? Trevor, can you go around and check if everyone has an image? Oh my goodness. So yeah, once again, this is a self-closing element. so you don't need the closing tag to the image element. It's just one. Let's go ahead, replicate this. So copy and paste it to every single div element we have.
Oh, come on. Once.
There's a bunch of copy and pasting.
Oh, shoot. Oops.
Do you guys have 4 images nicely stacked on top of each other? Please have it. Where am I going? Oh, also, if you guys haven't already, remove all your styling.
No, that's okay.
So copy this image onto all 4 of them. So yeah, if you guys haven't already, go to your CSS file and remove everything in there. We don't need styling right now. We'll get to that in a tiny bit. Once you guys have that though, on the 2nd and 4th image, so the image element we have, the 2nd and 4th one, give it a class of img-responsive. We're gonna make a responsive image. It's not really, it's not a semantic per se, but it's more of just like a type of design. Don't really worry about it, but. No, sorry, don't give the divs the class name, give the images the class name.
Good difference.
Yeah. So the 2nd and 4th image should have the class name of img-responsive. Okay. Whenever you guys are done with that, look up at me. We'll do it like kindergarten. You have a pretty face, Will. Liam.
Matthew, why are you always trying to do that?
All right. Do you guys have the 4 images? 2nd and 4th image, not div, but image, has the class name of image responsive. If you aren't ready to continue, raise your hand. Oh, you raise your hand?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can you go back there and check? Okay. Everyone good now? Okay. So now that we have that, I'm going to briefly kind of explain the block and inline displays. So one concept that's very closely related to the box model we just covered is called, is the display property. So it turns out the display property has many possible values, which we'll cover 2 of the most common ones being grid and flex in the next workshop session. But for now, we'll mainly focus on inline and block. So block and inline are mutually exclusive in a way to describe the behavior of an element, and in particular, like some key properties. So the difference between the 2 is a block element takes up the full width of its parent, if you think about that. So the block element takes up the full width of the parents, unless it's edited by CSS once again, while an inline element only takes up the width of its content. So inline will match the size of the content, while block will match the size of the parent. So if we give it a display block on the image, it's a child of the body. So if we write it like all of these are children of the body, if we gave those a display block, it would take up the entire size of our window. Now, if we gave it an inline styling property, it will only take up the size of the content. So in this case, it's the images. So it's very, very useful if you want something to be self-sizing or if you want something to be fixed in sizing. A block element also always starts on a new line, while an inline element does not. It continues. And you might ask yourself, why is this important? And that is because this kind of describes some behavior of HTML tags that we've used before. Okay, so what better way to kind of visualize this than using it right now? So if you guys go back to CSS, we'll kind of get into this. Okay, so let's select the large image container. So large IMG container. And yeah, so while you guys do that, actually create a selector for each class we made. So we made 3 total: a large image container, a small image container, and a image responsive. IMG-responsive. Let's add selectors for all of that. And while you guys write that, I'll kind of elaborate a tiny bit more. So this is kind of important because it's similar to some of the other concepts that we had, where let's for example, you had a div with a child of a paragraph. The div will break the content into a new line. So it won't continue off where it was before, but it enters a new thing. It's like a new division. It's not really picking up where it left off. While some tags like anchor and span don't. So if you hyperlink some text inside of other text, it's not going to go to a new line. It continues. If you use span, it does the exact same thing. And in a way, that's because by default, div is a block level element, while anchor and span are inline display elements. So let's start visualizing it. So in our large image container, let's give it a width and height of 600 pixels. And then by now you guys should be acquainted to the syntax of this. Width colon 600px, comma, not comma, semicolon, height 600px, semicolon. After that, let's give the small image container the same thing, but with 400 pixels. What we're doing now is, if you recall, we created 4 elements. 2 of them are large, 2 of them are small. The large ones are 600 pixels as a square, and small is about 400 as a square. Once you guys have that, let's edit the large image container again. Let's give it a border of 1px, solid, and black. That way we can visualize the border of it. Yeah, it's because it's massive. It's going off the screen. You can scroll for as long as it. And let's do the same thing to the image small container, or small image container. And if you guys expand your, your web app view, you can kind of see the box. It's kind of big. So now that we have that, let's give it a background so we can kind of see it. Let's give both large and small pink backgrounds. Pretty cows. Are those cows or horse? That's the real question. I can't tell.
Both.
Okay. You can kind of see the 2 different sizes, 600 and 400px. Now, let's kind of show off the different display stylings now. So if we go to image responsive, which should be the one thing we haven't touched yet, let's give it a display of block. I can't speak right now. Yep. So by default, it should already have a display of block, so nothing should have changed. Let's give it a new property that we haven't used before called max width. It's max-width, and let's give it 100%. So now if you guys kind of recall to the last workshop we did, we kind of slightly explained how percents work. Basically, these percents are relative to the entire size of this window right now. So it's saying the max width is the size of this window, which once again, won't do much. Let's give it a height. Let's give it a new value called auto. We'll cover that in a second. So height auto. Height is the property. The value is auto. AUTO. We'll cover that in a bit. And let's also give it a margin left and right of auto. You guys all have this? Give me a tiny second for you guys to write it down if you guys haven't already. Can you scroll around? Scroll up a tiny bit. Yeah. Okay, you guys all have that? All cut up. Anyone behind, raise your hand. We're still waiting. Okay, you need help? Can one of you guys go help her? Please? One of you guys go help her? We're almost done. We just have position properties, the index, and then we're done after this. Are you okay, William?
Yeah.
You took the quiz?
No. It's just the cow.
Oh, the cow.
Yeah, I'm trying to send it in. Sorry.
Are you all good? There? We're almost done, guys. We have one last tiny thing after this. Yeah. So good luck.
The HTML? Make sure that the image property or image responsive.
Yeah. The second and fourth image, once again, should have the class image responsive. Also, if you guys want to just watch the board now, we can just kind of cover it on here, and you guys can watch and learn a tiny bit. But okay, so if we first look at what the image, or sorry, I can't speak. First, let's look at what this does when the image is smaller than the container itself. So the first one at the very, very top. The first element is in the top left, as you can see, which is what we'd expect because it has the large image container class, which is saying it's just a 600 pixel box, right? Is there anything else to it?
No, I mean,
It's a 600 pixel box with a border and a background. Nothing. We didn't touch it at all. It's untouched. But if we look at the second one in this large container, we can see that it's actually horizontally centered. So we have just centered our first div, which is something that you will be Googling a lot after this. It will plague you for the rest of time. But yeah, so what we kind of did here is because we gave it the class image responsive, we used that and gave it properties of where the margin left and right are auto. So they're kind of equal in a sense. So because they are equal, it ends up centering the div. Are you guys good? Oh, just look over here for now. Yeah. We'll just like quickly go over these last few concepts. So yeah, because we gave image responsive two properties called margin left and right auto, we're able to stylize this block to be in the center. So now if we, wait, everyone good? So next we'll look at what happens when, I just realized, can you go to index HTML? Can you make, instead of 200 by 200, can you make it like 700? The last two.
Oh, the last two,
These
700?
last two 700, yeah.
Like just all numbers 700?
No, just the last two. Yeah. Last two, that's, yeah. Okay. So we edited real quickly the HTML to make the image size on the bottom two actually larger than the container size itself. So they're not implementing it. We just go down, scroll down.
Nice.
So we can see what happens now when when the size of the image itself is actually greater than the box itself. So the first element of this second part
This is cursed.
is expanded past its container.
We need
It's
to calm this out.
if you actually lower the width a bit. web page so we can go outside. No, lower, make it small. Yeah.
Oh.
It actually goes off the page, and that's because what is it? Yeah, it goes off the page, which is kind of ugly. But if we look at the second one, which has the image responsive tag, yeah, no, look here. Okay, it's like I see this. So if we look at the first image, whenever we actually change the size of the window, it just goes outside of the bounds. It doesn't actually stay within the frame. But the image responsive one, because we gave it a kind of dynamic size, whenever we actually close this, oh shit. I mean, oh heck. Oh shoot. Frick, something's wrong.
All right. This doesn't look right.
You know, we'll braze over that. You guys can Google that. It's a long day. Yeah, anywho, the max width that we added to this property overrides the width property that we had whenever it gets too big, and it stops the width from ever being larger than this max width size. So the max width is 100%. It cannot be larger than that. So basically it's saying that it will never scale the image larger than its original size. While whenever we use the auto keyword that we have on height, margin left, and margin right, it's saying it's adjusting the value of the property based on the content and context of the element itself. So in a way, basically what that means is for the height, for example, it keeps the aspect ratio the same size as the image gets larger. So we're not distorting it because we have a max width. Whenever we expand it, it could actually distort it and not keep the same aspect ratio. So that's kind of why we use auto there. It will do it automatically. Margin left and margin right will kind of fill in the rest of the space and equalize it. So that's how we kind of center stuff with block styling. But yeah, that's that. Kind of real quickly to zoom through the last few concepts. Last part is the position property. There are 5 common ones. Actually, I think there are only 5. Let's go to the notes. We'll finish the rest in the notes. So last 5 is static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky. Static is usually the default. That means it is relative to the top left, kinda. It's what everything uses. It's where it's based, kind of centered and anchored around. We also have relative, and relative is like, it's where the reference point is where the content area would normally be. So if we had padding, the content of whatever is inside of it will be where that point is. So it's kind of, yeah, that's kind of like what relative is. It's relative. It's in the name itself. It's relative to whatever it's in, whatever the parent is. There's also fixed, which is actually instead of referencing the parent element, so whatever is above it in the root and like the tree itself, it's actually referencing the entire view that you have, the entire size of your window, the viewport. It's referencing that and it's going off that positioning. While the last one is absolute positioning, and that is not even taking into account the size of your window, it's just counting in pixels. So if you have a size that is even bigger than your viewport, it's going to go off the page and it's not going to even let you, will it let you scroll? I think it will.
It should.
Yeah, it will let you scroll still, but yeah, it's actually fixed in pixels. So if you go to a larger monitor or a smaller monitor, it doesn't care because it's absolute. Kind of semantic wise, never use absolute positioning. Never, ever, ever, ever use absolute positioning. It is awful. It's also very, very impractical because if you try to code in mobile or code a website to be responsive in mobile, it will not be responsive at all if it's absolute positioning because it doesn't care about the relative size. So these are kind of harder to demonstrate here. It's something that you'll more likely practice using. If we click on the W3 Schools demo, it'll kind of show you a little bit more of the positioning properties. You guys can look at this at your own free time. They're on our notes that we have. And the last one is, actually go back to the W3. The last one is position sticky. This is probably one of the coolest things that you will remember. So if you guys have ever wondered, how do you get a navigation bar on the top? How do you ever have that thing at the top where you can click buttons? How do they actually code that? It's actually coded with one keyword, and that's position sticky. What you're saying is it's going to stick to the top part of your page if you give it that positioning. So if you can notice and you scroll around, yeah, you can see here, it sticks to the very top of the page. That's how navbar works. That's how you get stuff to the very top of your web page. You ever see that? Lastly, just last 2 things is quick aside, there's something called z-index. If you ever wondered, how do you get stuff on top of each other? In general, the newest element, so the one that's lowest on whatever you're coding, the newest child, that will normally always be displayed with priority or on top. But if you didn't want to care about that, you can actually use the property z-index. And basically, whatever z-index is higher is going to be what's displayed. So it's another way to give it priority. It's saying what's going to be on top. A z-index of 100,000 is going to be greater than the default of 0. So anything with that is going to be displayed on top. And the last thing is the float property. And you might think, oh, when you use Google Docs or Microsoft Word, you can center stuff on the left, right. That's all with floats. So if you just give it a float left, float right, you can do that, as you can see in the screenshot. It's kind of how it works. And basically, that's it. We covered the box property, some common box properties being the 4 properties: padding, border, margin, and content. We also covered how width and height works. We kind of got into box sizing properties and how it affects stuff. The both display of block and inline, how block is just, it depends on the width and height, while inline depends on the content itself. We also briefly covered some positioning keywords like static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky, z-index, and then floats. So that should have all given you guys a crash course slightly into how CSS works. Hopefully now that we've covered HTML and CSS to a kind of like very introductory degree, it should give you a better understanding of how web pages look. So when you go to Google next time, you can kind of see how it's working. If you go to inspect element, you can start messing around and seeing how everything's displayed, how everything's structured. It's kind of how it is. Now, of course, some of the topics we covered here, you'll probably never use. It is actually better not to use it because it is old and not very mobile friendly, and it's not responsive. So you'll probably never use like position absolutes. Never use that. You'll probably also never use box sizing and maybe padding and margin, but you'll probably use it a lot still. Next workshop, we're going to be covering grid and flexbox. Flexbox is the most popular way to kind of organize content. If you guys want to show up to any of these workshops, I would highly, highly recommend that one, because the way Flexbox works is kind of confusing at a first glance, but it is probably the most important concept you'll apply whenever you make a website. You can learn how to center a div without Googling and going through really messy setups. You can create responsive web pages, work for mobile and desktop, just by using that. It makes life a quadrillion times easier. It will probably solve most of your needs, but yeah, that'll be in the next workshop of our Intermediate CSS, and that should actually be the second part out of our 3 kind of mini part series into CSS. After that, we'll be getting into CSS frameworks. So basically getting into some tools that will do a lot of the work for you. But yeah, after that, it's JavaScript, and then we'll be getting to React. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Can you go back to the slideshow on the last screen? Thank you guys for coming out. Hopefully you left this workshop knowing just a slightly bit more how to make a website. Hopefully next time you go to a hackathon, you can kind of get started a lot easier than just Stack Overflowing and Googling geeks for geeks and how to do this stuff. So hopefully it gives you guys that. But once again, the best way to learn and kind of grow more into this is to just practice and implement it. Try to create stuff on your own, experiment, make mistakes, throw your head, look up Stack Overflow. That's probably the best way to learn. That's how I learned. This is how everybody learns pretty much. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for coming.